For this horror manga review, we're going to be looking at Higanjima by Koji Matsumoto. This manga started publication in 2002 and ran for 33 volumes. It has 2 sequel series, the third of which is still currently publishing, and it's also had live action film adaptations and a TV series. Personally, I've just read the first 2 manga series. I've yet to read the third or have seen any of the live action films, so this review is just going to be on the original manga series. The story is about a young man named Akira whose older brother goes missing. Akira and his family don't have any idea what happened to his older brother Atsushi until one day a woman shows up at his door with Atsushi's ID card claiming that he's alive and that he's in her home village on an island called Higanjima. She invites Akira to come to the village and to bring his friends along as well. Atsushi is in fact alive and on Higanjima, but what the woman leaves out is that the island has been completely overrun by vampires and that Atsushi is on the island trying to fight for his life against the vampires. Akira is suspicious of the woman's story, and when he tells his friends, they become suspicious as well. The leader of his group, an older friend named Ken, gathers the group together and they go to confront the woman in the hotel she's staying at. When they get there, they see in the room there's a vampire there drinking her blood. The vampire sees them and begins to pursue them. At one point, Ken gets captured by the vampire and he drinks his blood. The vampire's bite paralyzes Ken and he thinks he's about to be killed, but the woman steps in and saves him from the vampire. Then the group works together and manages to kill the vampire. After they kill the vampire, the woman, whose name is Ray, tells them the story of what's actually going on. She tells how her home village was taken over by vampires and that she was sent to the mainland to try to find family members of the people that were in the village in order to lure them back to the village so that the vampires can have more people to feed on. So she was sent there to lure Akira and his friends to the village, and the vampire that she was with was there as her overseer. She asked the group to come to her village and help her kill the vampires and save Atsushi as well as her mother and sister. She lies to them and tells them that there are only 2 vampires remaining besides the one that they already killed. So Ken agrees to help her kill the vampires and the group decides to go along with her. They invite a larger group of their friends under the guise of having a graduation party on the island, and the group sets off by boat to the island. As soon as their boat arrives on the island, they're quickly overwhelmed by vampires, and they realize that it was a lie that there were only 2 vampires and that the island is actually overrun with them and there are hundreds of vampires on the island. The group is captured and they are brought to a facility in the village where the humans are being kept and are being drained of their blood in order to feed the vampires. After some time, the group manages to make their escape and they flee the facility and go into the forest. While fleeing from the vampires, Akira runs into his brother, who has now become a very powerful fighter and is very skilled in killing vampires. Akira's brother is a part of a resistance that are fighting against the vampires to try to take back the island from them. This is very difficult though because of how powerful the vampires are. There's a very large number of vampires, and the leader of the vampires, a vampire named Miyabi, is extremely powerful and is basically immortal. So Akira and his friends will have to fight for their survival against the vampires and the other creatures that have taken over the island. The vampires are pretty cool and unique in this manga. The regular vampires are much stronger than humans. They say about 3 times as strong as a human, and they are extremely difficult to kill. You see in the first confrontation the group has against the first vampire, it takes them a very long time to kill him. Later on in the story, it's revealed that the vampires were not originally evil and once lived in harmony with the people of the village. They were able to live with the human villagers, and the humans would offer their blood to the vampires, and the vampires would use their strength to help the humans with various things. But during World War II, the Japanese government came to the island to conduct experiments on the vampires in order to find a way to turn them into a weapon. Through their experiments, they create a serum that can give a human the abilities of the vampires. One of the people that this was used on was a man named Miyabi, and the serum made him extremely powerful and basically immortal. Miyabi could also use his blood to infect other people and turn them into vampires that are subordinate to him. Miyabi tries to use his powers to take over the island, but is eventually sealed away. Years later, Akira's brother Atsushi comes to the island because he's marrying a girl who lives on the island. He wanders into a shrine where Miyabi is sealed away at and accidentally releases him. And then Miyabi uses this opportunity to infect as many people as he can, and the vampires increase in number until they're able to take over the whole village. And then it's revealed later on in the story that his ultimate goal is to use his blood to infect all of Japan and eventually the whole world and rule over it. His plan is that he'll use mosquitoes that have sucked his blood and become infected, and then release these mosquitoes out into the world, and then to spread the virus on a large scale and take over the whole world. So the group have to fight against him and try to kill Miyabi before his plan comes to fruition. Overall, I did really like this manga. I enjoyed the early sections of the manga much more than the later ones. Early on in the story has a much more survival horror type feel to it. Each vampire and each creature that the group comes across is a major threat, and they're all very difficult to kill and escape from. It gives everything a very tense feeling, and you never know what's going to happen. The violence in the story is very gruesome. The humans who are captured by vampires often die in really horrible ways, or they're torn to pieces by these giant, bizarre creatures. Miyabi is a really intimidating antagonist because he's so powerful and feels completely unbeatable. Plus, he's very sadistic and evil. The atmosphere of the manga is very dark and tense because of this, and it makes it a really exciting read when you're watching the group fight for survival, and you never know what's going to happen. You never know what characters are going to die at any time. Unfortunately, the manga doesn't really keep that feeling throughout. It's a fairly long manga, as I said, 33 volumes, and somewhere around the middle where Akira starts to train with his brother and with the leader of the resistance, and he starts to become very powerful like his brother, and eventually becomes even more powerful to the point where the regular vampires he just goes through like they're nothing, and he kills them in seconds with no effort. The only creatures that can pose any threat to him at all are the gigantic monsters called the demons, or Miyabi himself. This kind of makes the manga lose a lot of the tension and the excitement, and it becomes less of like a survival horror story and becomes more of like almost a battle manga, having a feeling more akin to something like Gaunt's rather than a horror story. It's still alright and it's pretty entertaining. There's some good fights and some really interesting creature design that makes it readable, but it's definitely not as good in the later half compared to the beginning. The beginning section captured a feeling of survival horror that's really rarely done, so I really enjoyed that, but it does lose it later on, especially in the later parts where Akira becomes so powerful that almost nothing besides Miyabi is even a threat to him at all, and those interactions don't really feel like survival horror interactions. It's more similar to, like I said, a battle manga. The creature design's really interesting. There's a wide variety of creatures in the story that are mutations of the vampires. If the vampires don't drink blood, they can begin to mutate into bizarre, mindless creatures. If the mutation is successful, they'll become these extremely powerful, gigantic monsters that are much more powerful than the average vampire and pose a large threat even to the vampires. These demons have a wide variety of designs, and they keep some characteristics that the person had before they turned into the demon. These demons will participate in more of the unique fights later in the series when Akira has to fight against them. In the story, Miyabi will use this transformation intentionally to force certain vampires to turn into these monsters so he can use them as part of his army. This gives a really cool body horror type horror to the series because these people are forced to transform into these bizarre, grotesque creatures. The creatures often have really strange, gross, and grotesque designs that are pretty cool and pretty unique. So that helps the manga stay interesting when later in the series the plot starts to get a little bit stale. The characters are pretty likable despite being pretty simple. There's not any deep writing as far as the character development, but I suppose it is pretty satisfying to see Akira turn from being a bit of a wimp into being a really strong guy and a leader that everyone looks up to. Ultimately, I would give this one 3.5 stars out of 5. It doesn't have the best plot, and it loses a lot of the reasons why I enjoyed it so much early on in the later sections, but it's still overall an enjoyable read. It's a pretty unique series, and I haven't really read anything like it, so I would recommend it if you're into that type of horror. And that's going to do it for the video. If you enjoyed the video, please like the video. I'll try to be doing more horror manga series reviews in the future, so if you're into horror manga, you could subscribe. And thanks so much for watching.